Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mirror of Spirit. I'm Greg. I'm your host, and we've got a great guest tonight, and it's going to be a real good show. To start off with, I like to go ahead, like I usually do, mention a few things, people I support, and another list. But the people I support, number one is Plotographs, and that's a charity that was set up by a gentleman by the name of Tim Miley, who uh, is in the circles in the Midwest, and he's a great guy. He lost his pup, and he didn't know what he was going to do, and he went ahead, and what he did was he took a picture of himself and his pup, and he had copies made of it, and went to one of the Paracons in Chicago, and went ahead and sold them, and took all that money he got and put it into animal shelters, etc. And as it turned out, he's still doing it today, and it's really amazing because of his connection with the paranormal. He's able to go ahead and pull people in for speaking at his events that really make him something. I mean, the events are spectacular, some of them. So I've had the pleasure of being at 2 or 3 of them now, and it's always a great time, and the people are really, really something. So that's number one. And number 2 is PKC, Paranormal Kicks Cancer, and that's Chris Gaskowski and Alex Wilkinson, and they're from down in Florida, and they're two fantastic people, paranormal people who go ahead and set up events, and what they do is they take all the money from that and it all goes back into cancer research. I first met them down at Old South Pit down in Tennessee. I was doing a show with the owner, and they were there, and I got an opportunity to talk to them, and I sort of thought they were really, really neat, and then I wanted them to go ahead and come on the show, and we made it happen, and I've been a supporter ever since. Number 3 is the Jessica Petrie Foundation, and that's the daughter of Howard Petrie, which is the Paranormal United Network. Jessica died, and he set up the foundation for her, and it was a foundation, it was a resource for expecting mothers, families of pregnant women with mental illness. So that's another charity that's been established. Those are the 3 that I'm running right now. I'm not running, I'm just letting everybody know about them. I support them, and then after that is my author list, and I probably am missing a few off of that, but especially since what I heard of before the show started. But the authors are Bruce Holliday, Tobias Wayland, Adam Benedict, Kathy Kressel, Sherilyn Cotter, Dr. Heatherly Langdon, Ron Iacovati, Tony Rathman, Natalie Jones, Patty Negri, Sylvia Schultz, Amelia Cotter, Rex Nielsen, and David Sloan. And that's about it. The only other thing I want to go ahead and mention briefly is the fact that the other show that I do is on Wednesday night, and it's One Spirit Connect, and that's all ITC. So that show has been going on for quite some time, and we've had some fantastic things happen. And it's all groups that rotate from various parts of the country, come in, and we do double Estes. A lot of times we'll do doubles, or if we don't have enough people, we'll do singles on the Estes sessions. So it's really interesting. It's a lot of fun, and it really makes you stop and think when you hear some of the responses. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in my guest tonight, and this is Mr. Joe Franke. He's from the Warren Legacy Foundation, and welcome, Joe. Welcome to have you.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and it's about time. I know, the way things go, and I know the way you've been really, really busy. It's really hard to go ahead and get you to come on to things like this. I know your work is improved drastically in the foundation. At least I'm assuming that's the case.
Yeah.
So,
it's slowed down a bit now that the Halloween season, or as we call spooky season, is over. I don't recall October at all, to be honest with you. Yeah, I've been traveling around the country. I lecture, and I do a lot of fundraisers, speak at public libraries and things like that, and just talk about this fascinating subject of paranormal research. It has taken up 40 years of my life, So I thank you for having me on. And it's a good time of the year. It's Friday the 13th, so it should be a lot of fun.
Yes, it's got to be something going on. But anyway, to have you on and to go ahead and talk about a lot of the subjects that do mean a lot to both of us and a lot of the people that are watching tonight. It's important to go ahead and mention your background and where you come from. And if you could go ahead and give everybody a little taste of exactly who Joe Franke is, and then we can take it from there.
Well, sure. Again, my name is Joe Franke. I live in Connecticut. I'm in the Northeast. And I grew up when I was 18 years old. I've told the story many times about meeting Ed and Lorraine Warren. I was a teenager right out of high school. I think I graduated in June of '86. September of 1986, my wife and I were dating. We were just boyfriend, girlfriend at the time. We had been dating a few months. And I remember it was a Friday night, and Laurel called me up, and I think we were planning on going to dinner or going to the movies. That's what kids did back then. We didn't have the internet or social media back then. And she saw in the local paper that Ed and Lorraine Warren were going to be lecturing at a local hotel. It was a Holiday Inn. And what Ed and Lorraine would do they would rent a room at a hotel, and then they would have a ticketed event, and they would sell tickets, and then they would have their lectures, their slideshow, which was fascinating. And I had heard of the Warrens. I had never met them up to that point, but I had heard a lot about them. I had seen them on television and in print media, of course, newspaper, magazines, and the radio. And so Laurel, she says to me, she's like, how'd you like to go and see them speak? I said, absolutely. So we go, and I remember Lorraine was sitting at the table greeting people and selling the tickets, and she looked at me, and I remember she looks at me like she cocks her head to the side, and she's looking at me like, how you look at somebody that you're like, I know this person. Where do I know this person from? You try to picture the face with the name, and she's giving me that kind of look, and she says, honey, have we met before? And I said, no, Lorraine. I said, I've never met you folks. I said, I've heard a lot about you. I'm excited to be here for the show. And she's just staring at me. I didn't know what she was doing at the time. she explained later. But she says, honey, there's a reason why you're here tonight. She said, make sure you come and see Ed and I after the show. I want to talk to you. So I was like, oh, okay. So I was very excited. The show ran about 90 minutes maybe or so. And, Tony was there, their son-in-law. I met Tony the same night. And so after the show, Lorraine was such a sweetheart. I mean, if anybody's ever met her, she called everybody honey. She was just a sweet lady. And so one of the things we used to do after a case or after a lecture is we'd go out to a diner. And we would regroup at the diner and talk about the events of the evening, whether it be, how did the lecture go, and were there any people in the audience that were skeptics and things like that, and anybody make any comments, or if it was after a case, we would compare notes and take notes and things like that. So she's holding my hand. We're at the diner, and she's looking at me, and she says, "I'm reading your aura." Lorraine had the ability to read auras on people, and that's that supernatural glow that emanates from every one of us. And she said, honey, I can tell from your aura that you were meant to do this work. She said, would you like to come and work with Ed and I? They were putting some classes together. And I said, absolutely, without skipping a beat. I was smitten. I mean, I was drawn in. And, I never really had any experience with the paranormal. I was always fascinated by it. Ghost stories. And I think Scooby-Doo was my favorite cartoon when I was growing up. And, so that's how I met them. Again, 18 years old, fresh out of high school. And so the Warrens would have these classes. Back then, it was a little place in Newtown, Connecticut. It was called Hawley Manor. It's now called the Inn at Newtown, I think. And they had a little back room that Ed and Lorraine would use. I think it was every Monday night from like 7 to 9. We would meet there. And that's when I first learned about all the iconic cases that we all know and love. I mean, Amityville, Annabelle, the Cursed Doll, all the cases that the Conjuring movies are based on. And a lot of them are loosely based on the cases, because Hollywood, once they get their talons into these stories, they take a lot of liberties with them. But, so I remember there was a case in Connecticut called The Haunting in Connecticut. And that house is about 15 minutes from where I live. And I've been here 33 years. And I remember Ed saying to me, the case started around 86 to 89, I believe the case ran. And he goes, hey, kid. He always called me kid. He's like, hey, kid. He goes, I got a case right up there where you live, but you're not ready for it yet. And he's right. I wasn't. John Zaffis, I believe, was the lead investigator on that case, and Chris McKinnell, their grandson. But, so I went to the classes, and my wife, who was just my girlfriend at the time, God, we've been together 40 years now, been married for 33 years. And, Laurel would come along and take notes and help Lorraine with whatever and writing stuff down. But once my wife started getting pregnant with our children, she stopped investigating. She kind of just stayed home. I met them at a lecture, and now, for the last almost 30 years, I've been lecturing myself and carrying on their work and their legacy, hence the Warren Legacy Foundation. And, I'm still actively involved in cases when I'm needed. Chris and I and Bill Slevin down in Florida, there's only a handful of us, I believe, that have demonic experience, that have worked on cases where there's actually demons involved. And I don't wish that on my worst enemy. Those cases are very, very hard and very grueling. I've had people say to me, oh, that's cool. I'd like to have a case like that. No, you wouldn't. And be careful what you wish for. But you just never know. Whenever you're going to go into a case, you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, because you never know what you're going to be faced with. You could be faced with nothing. It could just be something that's psychosomatic and it's not paranormal in nature at all. Or you could have Casper the Friendly Ghost, or maybe, grandma or grandpa coming for a visit. Or it could be something more dark and sinister. But you need to be prepared for anything. And I've had about 4 demonic cases that I can recall in my lifetime. And over 40 years, that's one every 10 years. That's not a lot. But demonic activity, people need to understand, it's very rare. Okay, and possession is rarer still. Okay, Hollywood and television, all these YouTube things, they want you to believe that there's a demon lurking around every corner. Well, it's not that way, you know. And when I talk about things like this, I bring up the subject of divination. And one of the most common forms of divination in this day and age is the Ouija board. You know, people don't understand the common dangers and misconceptions of the Ouija board. It's not just a harmless toy. I mean, it is a board game, yes, made by Parker Brothers. However, it's how you use it. It's the intention behind it. You know, as Lorraine would often say, referring back to Annabelle, you know, the doll itself is harmless. It's it's what you do with the doll. You know, with anything, you have to conjure these things. You know, when you get into the occult or Satanism or idolatry. I mean, when you're using these devices, even as simple as an EVP session, you know, or taking out your tape recorder and asking questions out into the unknown. I mean, that's very dangerous. People don't understand that that can be very dangerous. Now, that's not to say that if you've done it, you're going to have a problem. But you need to be careful because you're asking questions out into the unknown, which means you're trying to establish a relationship with something because you're asking for something to come back and answer you. And, you know, if you're asking, same thing with the Ouija board, you're asking questions, you're thinking, the spirit of your grandmother's coming through. It's not your grandmother. I can almost guarantee that. You know, it's going to be something disguised as anybody you want, to gain your trust and to allow you to open that door, what I call doorway to the demonic. Once you open that doorway, you're inviting things into your life that you just cannot comprehend. And people will contact me and say, Joe, I need you to come over and get rid of this thing. And I said, you don't understand. This isn't Ghostbusters. I'm not going to show up with a proton pack on my back and a mobile ecto chamber and suck up a ghost and take it back to my containment chamber. I said, that's Hollywood's version. I said, these are things that once you get these attachments and something gets attached to you, they're very, very difficult to get rid of. And that's where your faith comes in. Because as Ed would tell me, he says, faith is your most powerful weapon. And matter of fact, I'm dealing with a family now recently that approached me when I was in Newtown, Connecticut, doing an event with Chris back in October. And this family was telling me about these experiences they're having in their home. There's a lot of fighting going on and hatred and just people just can't stand each other. And I asked them, let me ask you one question. How is your faith? And they said, Joe, we've lost our faith. We used to be church-going people. We've lost our faith. I said, you need to find it again. You need to get it back. I said, because if there is something demonic or sinister or let's just say negative, doesn't even have to be demonic. It could be a negative human spirit that's feeding off all this negativity. I said, you need to find your faith and you need to come together as a family. I said, otherwise, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing anybody can do for you unless you join forces and come together and love one another. And, and it sounds easy to do, but it's not. And so I gave some homework. I said, I need you to come together as a family, find your faith, go to church together, whatever your faith is, whatever church you go to, I said, once you've done that, let's see what happens. If I need to come out to the house, I can do that. It's in Connecticut. It's probably about an hour from me. I can come out to the house. We can invite, your pastor out there or your priest, and they could do a house blessing. I said, but, it's very difficult once you've got these negative attachments to get rid of them. You can't just shake them off because you have invited them in, whether you did it consciously or unconsciously. You've invited these things in. And that's one big thing that I do when I give my talks. I'm a big ham. I like to joke around and I keep it lighthearted. But there's a message underlying, depending on who my audience is. I like to target these up and coming investigators because I want to take the knowledge that I have, and trust me, I don't know everything. and I don't profess to know everything. But after 4 decades and being taught by the Warrens, who were grandparents to me, I mean, they're family to me. I try to take all the knowledge that they poured into me and spread that around and give that to the up and coming investigators, because there's a lot of good people in this world trying to do good work to help people. And I'm certainly not the only one. There's many of us, but I'm not getting any younger myself. I've got some health issues. Some of them may be related to the work that I'm doing. I could never prove that. I've got some heart issues, some liver issues I'm dealing with. Matter of fact, I just had a medical procedure done today, so if I seem a little loopy, forgive me.
Okay.
But this to me, when Lorraine said that to me, I remember it like it was 5 minutes ago. She said, "Honey, you were meant to do this work." So what I took that is, I tell folks, this was a vocation for me, not an occupation. I never charge people for helping them. Rarely do I even ask people to pay my expenses. I mean, if I got to jump on a plane and fly out to Nevada, I say, look, can you cover my airfare? If they can't do it, I'm not going to say I'm not coming. I'll find a way. Or maybe through donations through the foundation, we might have some money in the kitty to cover expenses. If not, it comes out of my own pocket. Because people need help. Of course, we do a lot of investigating before we get to that point. People say, "Yeah, I got a ghost here. Can you come take care of it?" Well, no. There's a process. There's an interview process. There's a psychological and a medical evaluation process that we ask people to go through, so that we can discern whether they do have a true paranormal affliction, or maybe it's just something psychological. Maybe they have some form of psychosis, or in the case of Annalise Michel, if you know that case, the exorcism of Emily Rose, that poor girl had a specific form of epilepsy. So she had a psychological disorder that was kind of that doorway, that allowed these what they call legion to be attached to her. I mean, she didn't just have one demon; she had at least six.
Wow.
I know I jump around on you a lot, but when I lecture, I talk about demonic activity. I talk about divination, because there has to be a way in. They can't just attach themselves to you. You can't just walking down the street and a demon jumps in your body. It doesn't work that way. There's got to be a doorway, and that doorway, like I said, it could be from using a Ouija board or satanic worship, or it could be some kind of physical or sexual abuse you suffered as a child. It could be a generational curse. We've got a case in Oklahoma that's been going on for a while where this poor young woman, her mother and her grandmother before her were into black magic and witchcraft and Ouija boards and things like that. And, that stuff, things we call generational curses that can be handed down from family member to family member. So it's not black and white. It's not all just black and white. There's a lot to this work, and I'm still learning. I'm 57, almost 57 years old now, and I've been doing this, almost 40 years, like I said, but I'm still learning, and we can all learn from one another. I don't care if you've been doing this for 4 months or 40 years. We all work together. There's no hierarchy here. I mean, yeah, I have a title in the organization. I'm, CIO. Chris is the CEO. We have titles just so people know who we are. But, there's no, we're all volunteers. No one gets paid for working with the foundation. Everyone is free to come and go as they please. We're trying to recruit new members. We need good people of all backgrounds, of all faiths. We're looking for, medical personnel, attorneys, doctors. We just got a new gentleman that joined us. He's a hypnotherapist. Wonderful gentleman.
Oh,
And these people do all this work pro bono. This is, they volunteer their time. Some attorneys that work with us help us with the legal aspects of the foundation. And they don't charge. They do this out of the goodness of their heart because they believe in the cause.
wow,
I'm
that's
sorry,
really
that
something.
was a long-winded answer, Greg, but
No, that's fine.
excuse me.
That's why you're here, so that everybody understands, where you come from and what you do. The idea that you've been involved on the East Coast that much. Now, have you done any cases like west of the Mississippi?
I haven't been out west much. I was in Oregon, once, many years ago. But most of the cases I've dealt with have been on the Atlantic coast. New England, of course. So basically from Maine to Florida. I wasn't at liberty to travel a lot with the Warrens, unfortunately, because I had a full time job. My wife and I did have opportunities to travel with them around New England. I would attend just about every one of the lectures that I could. I also doubled as security for them. Back in my 20s, I was a big guy. I was 350 pounds, and big weightlifter. I used to weightlift, and I took 29 years. I took my martial arts, and sometimes you get some unruly people in some of the events that Ed Lorraine would do, and people would get disrespectful if they had a couple too much to drink, and Ed would just look at me and go, "Joe, take care of this." And I would just approach people. I'm a big teddy bear. I'd say, "Look, folks, if you're going to be disrespectful, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Yeah, it didn't happen very often at all, but that was my learning experience. I would go to the lectures and just listen to them, even though I may have heard these stories over and over again. Each time I heard a story, I learned something new. And the story of the Enfield poltergeist in England, and the story about the Harrisville haunting in Rhode Island, which you all know as the Conjuring House. And the Annabelle doll, as I mentioned, the Amityville case. So everybody, all these people say Amityville was a hoax. It wasn't a hoax. I mean, I don't believe it was. I wasn't there. But why would my mentors lie to me? I've known these people my entire adult life, and they're gone now. Ed's been gone 18 years, and Lorraine's been gone, 5.5 years already. They're no longer here to defend themselves. So I tell people, I said, look, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but be respectful. Don't disrespect the Warren legacy, because then, I'm still here, and I'm going to defend them, because I knew them as people. Most of the people, the naysayers, the haters, if you will, never met them in their life. They've seen things on TV and they've read articles about this and that and other thing. Look, I've given people my personal phone number. So if you have a problem with something you learned about the Warrens, you call me, and I'll answer any question I can within reason. But I knew these people intimately. I helped put them in the ground, for Christ's sake. I was pallbearer for Lorraine. And I wish they were still here. I still have questions myself sometimes. I wish I could pick up the phone and call her. So I just have an open mind. People that that they want to be haters and they say the Warrens were charlatans and they were in it for the money. No, they weren't. They weren't. And I hate to see that. I've seen a lot lately on YouTube where people are just running their name through the mud, and I said, you don't understand. That's I'll sit there and be yelling at the TV screen like that's not true. If you never met these people in your life, I knew them as people. To me, they weren't the world famous Ed and Lorraine Warren. They were Graham and Gramps. They were people. And the funny thing about it is, I'm the age now, my wife and I, that the Warrens were when we met them. So it's kind of come full circle for us. The Warrens are like 58 and 59 years old, and that's about the age my wife and I are now. So I think about that often. I'm like, wow, have I really been doing this long?
Now that you have children and they're older, obviously.
Yeah.
Has she mentioned joining you at all back as your wife?
Well, no. I shield my family from the work that I do. I'm just very protective.
That was a roundabout way to ask that question. Okay.
Yeah, well, no, it's a very good question. My wife doesn't have the interest in it anymore. I mean, I'll tell her about certain cases, but most of the time she's like, I don't want to know about it. Just be careful. don't bring anything home, kind of thing. My children, I have twin daughters who are almost 26 years old now, and my son is 29. They've always been fascinated in the work. For years, my daughters have been like, Dad, I want to go on cases with you. And I'm like, no, I don't want, you're too young, you're too young. Well, Dad, you were 18 when you started. They rub it in my face. I said, yeah, you're right. But that was a different time. I'm just very protective of my family. I always have been. My daughters are very helpful to me in many other ways. They'll help me with the website. They'll help me with my social media stuff. They'll help me with case notes and things like that. But I'm not comfortable bringing them on cases because I don't want. I know what's happened to me, and I mean I've been physically assaulted more times than I can count by unseen forces, and I don't want my children exposed to that. Yes, they're adults now and they can fend for themselves, but I'm just very protective. That's why they call me Papa Bear. Yeah, I'm just very protective of not only my family but my friends. And that's why I said earlier when people come to me, and some of them are foundation members, some are just colleagues or the general public, and they say, "Geez, Joe, that's fascinating. I'd like to experience something like that." And I said, "No, don't say that." I said because you wouldn't. I had a friend of mine say when I told him the time when I was thrown across the room, he's like, "Wow," he goes, "That sounds pretty scary, but I'd like to experience something like that." And I said, "No, you wouldn't." I said, "Why would you want to do that?" And then he thought about it a little bit. He's like, "Yeah, you're right. I wouldn't." But like I said, that kind of stuff is very rare. If I'm never faced with another demonic case in my life, I'm not going to be heartbroken. A lot of the things that we deal with are just helping people understand what may or may not be happening to them and around them. One of the first questions I ask these people is, how many of these TV shows do you watch, or these YouTube videos? No, well, people get hooked on this stuff, and look, I don't blame them.
Oh,
It's fascinating stuff. Some of these YouTubers do a fantastic job, and then now you have the YouTube debunkers that debunk these things, and then they got haters and people are insults are flying back and forth, and I'm sitting there going, really, people? Can't we just get along? We can disagree but still be friends. I'll ask a question to my audience a lot. I'll say, how many people believe in ghosts or demons? And most people raise their hand, hence the reason why they're there to listen to me. But you get some people that say, yeah, I'm a skeptic. I'm like, well, that's fine. I said, we can still be friends. I said, maybe you'll walk out of here after listening to me for 2 hours and say, maybe he's got something there. All I ask of my audience is to have an open mind. Is it possible? I always coin the phrase from the. Have you ever seen the original movie, The Miracle on 34th Street?
yeah.
There's a line in that movie where the gentleman, I forget his name, says to Maureen O'Hara, he says, "Faith is believing in something that common sense tells you not to." In other words, faith is believing in something that's not tangible. You can't see it, you can't feel it or touch it or smell it, but you know it's there. Like I use air as an example. Do you believe
Right.
in the existence of air? Well, yeah, it sustains life. We breathe it. It keeps us alive. But can you see it? Can you touch it?
No.
It's not tangible. So whatever your beliefs are, and some people are atheists. They may not believe in anything. Some people say, "Well, once I die, I die. There is no, afterlife." And I said, "Well, if that's what you believe, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you." I said, all I ask of you is to have an open mind. Is it possible? I say, how is it possible that I'm standing before you? Or how is it possible you're sitting in front of me tonight? Where did we come from? I believe most people believe that there is some supreme being or supreme power that created all of this. But I'm certainly not trying to push my beliefs on people. I approach things from the Roman Catholic perspective because I was born and raised Roman Catholic. Ed and Lorraine were very Roman Catholic, and I was taught by them. But I respect people of all faiths. I respect people that don't have faith. You know, but they say there's no atheists in foxholes. Well, there's no atheists in haunted houses either.
So when you go ahead and you get ready to to go on an investigation, do you have a particular uh, set of steps that you follow every time as far as, say, do you do prayers of protection? Do you
Yeah.
do anything like that?
Very good question. And yes, the short answer is yes. What I tell people is, regardless of what case you may be involved in, you always want to be in what I call a state of grace or a state of absolution. In other words, you want to be free of sin. And in my religion, I'll go to confession. And I have a very unique way of confessing. What I do is I usually meet with Father Ed, my priest. He's still around. He's about 85 years old now. But I'll meet with Father Ed in person, usually sit with him in his office because he knows what I do, obviously. And I've known him for many, many years. And I'll, I'll, I'll do my confession with him in person, face to face, and because if you're working on a case where there's evil involved, and I'll tell you a story in a minute, but you want to make sure that you are free of sin. You are absolved of those sins. So yes, I pray prayers of protection. I pray the rosary. I don't go to church every week. I'll admit it to everybody. But I talk to God every day. I talk to Ed and Lorraine all the time. I talk to my parents, my grandparents. They're all passed. God love them. But I have a set way of doing things where I'm protecting myself and my family and everyone involved. So not only will I protect myself, but I will protect the family I'm working with. I'll protect my family. I have things follow me home from cases. Things happen in my house often, but they don't have permission to stay. They don't have permission to bother my family. I'm very protective. So you need to protect yourself, and that's what a lot of people don't do, or I don't think they do, or they don't do it properly. And that's why I got contacted back in October by this young group of people. They're probably in their early 20s, early mid 20s, and they said, "Joe, we need your help." I said, "Well, what happened?" They said, "Well, a bunch of us went to such and such cemetery with a Ouija board, and something followed us home."
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, first of all, what the heck were you doing in the cemetery in the middle of the night, sitting on a gravestone, messing with a Ouija board?" I said, "The spirit of the people that are buried there, they're not there." I said, "Some of these gravestones are 100, 200 years old." I said, "What you're doing, excuse me, is you're conjuring." I said, "And these evil forces, they don't take up time or space. They're there at the speed of thought. Once you've opened your mouth and you've offered that suggestion, that you want to see something, you want to hear something. If there's something here, give us a sign of your presence." I'm like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" I see it on television all the time.
Yep.
And I tell people, I said, "Look, just because you may have used the Ouija board when you were a teenager doesn't mean you're going to have a problem." I said, "Well, go buy Monopoly or Hungry Hungry Hippos or something." I said, "You don't need to be playing with a Ouija board." And I know there's a lot of people out there that collect them. I actually had a woman approach me down in Florida last year, and she said, "Well, I used to collect Ouija boards, and I have a bunch of them, and some of them I have hanging up." I said, "Well, where did you get them?" She goes, "Well, I get them from various antique stores, or I'll buy them online." She goes, "What are your thoughts?" I said, "Well, you're probably not going to like my answer." I said, "But you have no idea where those boards have come from and what they've been used for." I said, they could have a long history of being involved in black magic or whatever. I said, "I don't condone it." I said, "However, if you've had them for a while and everything's fine, and as long as you're not using them to conjure, I think you'd be okay." But sometimes people are like, "Well, Joe, after I heard you talk, I don't want these in my house anymore." I said, "Well, that's your decision, and then I'll instruct them if you want to get rid of them. This is how you would get rid of it." I've had people say, "Can I send it to you?" I said, "Well, you can send it to me. I'll take care of it for you." But you should never burn a board. I've tried to burn boards in the past, and they won't burn. They would char, but the board itself would stay pretty much intact. So I would give them instructions to dig a hole and consecrate the ground. Take a Saint Benedict and a Saint Michael medal that's blessed. Make sure it's blessed. Take some holy water and bury it. Just bury it and forget about it. And then let that negative energy that's attached to that board sit with the board for the rest of eternity.
So
Just put it.
you bury the metals. You bury the metals with it too.
Yeah, that's the extra added layer of protection. And Ed taught me that. And I always have Saint Michael and Saint Benedict medals that are blessed. Because if they're not blessed, then they're nothing but a piece of metal. And if you don't believe in it, and this is why I talked about faith earlier, if you don't have faith in this bottle of holy water, okay, it's nothing but a glass of water or a bottle of water. Okay, it's the faith behind that item, that religious relic, that is the power. I said, if you're wearing a crucifix, I had someone who was wearing a crucifix and they were showing it to me. I said, is it blessed? And they said, no. I said, you might want to get it blessed. I said, because other than that, it's just a piece of wood or a piece of metal hanging around your neck. I said, but you have to have faith in the power of, what that item stands for, what it symbolizes. Because when people get scared, they're like, well, what should I do? Should I go out and hang some crucifixes on my walls? And I said, no, that's not the answer. I said, depending on your faith, I said, you need to get right with your faith and get strong with your faith. And, I tell people, I said, look, I don't want to sound hypocritical. I don't go to church every week, but I go to church every day in my own mind. I talk to God every day. I ask for forgiveness. I ask for prayers, and I I don't want to say I argue with Father Ed, but he was like, well, don't you think 1 hour a week is worth, spending time, giving God 1 hour a week? I said, Father, I don't disagree with you. I said, but God is everywhere. Why do I have to come to this building once a week? He doesn't like that answer, or when I ask him that question, but, God is everywhere and he will listen. And even if you don't believe, okay, if you ask for forgiveness, he's never going to turn his back on you. I said, that's the only way you're going to defeat these evil forces. I mean, they're not tangible. You can't physically fight them. It doesn't matter how big and strong I am, or I once was when I was younger. I got picked up and thrown across the room on a case. I was 350 pounds. I got picked up and thrown around like that doll sitting behind me, like I was nothing. I can't fight these things. I don't have a big S on my shirt and a big red cape on my back. I'm just a mortal human being,
Right. So I'm going to throw these up every once in a while because we have a few of these questions. And this one was from Annette. And she says, were you with Mr. and Mrs. Warren when they investigated the Eddie Bro of Vermont?
I don't know if I was involved in that case. Does she know what town that was? I think that was up in northern Vermont.
I don't
have to think about that one. I mean, I obviously wasn't on every single case the Warrens did, but a lot of them I was. And they worked, all over New England, all over the world, really. But I'm going to have to say no because I don't remember. It doesn't come to mind, so I'm sorry.
Okay. Maybe
it rings a bell. I think there's a colleague of mine, Jason, that was involved in that case. So Jason
and
McLeod,
this other one here. So everybody in the chat can pass this around. Does drinking alcohol and or doing drugs cause an opening for an attachment or possession?
Yes, it could. Yes, because that is an affliction. It could be a history of alcohol or drug abuse, sexual abuse, and I don't say this to be funny, but even pornography. Anything that is an addiction is basically an abomination to God because that is something that you put in front of God or make more important than God, which is against the first commandment. And that could be, I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but that could be anything from, idolatry, or astrology, even horoscopes, things like that. Even psychics need to be very careful. And this is sometimes where I get myself into trouble. But I have a lot of friends who are gifted psychics. But if you're well trained and well grounded and you know what you're doing, you can do this safely. You know. But if you don't know what you're doing and you think you do, you can be putting yourself and your clients in danger. So, but yes, to answer your question, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, psychological disorders, like I said, generational curses, those are all what we call soul wounds, and these are the things that these negative forces I have found prey upon because you are in a weakened state. It's like the weakest link kind of thing. They're always going to go after the weakest link because they're easy prey. Someone like me, they wouldn't target right away, even though they hate me. And they hate people like me. Ed said to me, I remember he said to me one day, he goes, kid, he goes, the devil knows who we are. He goes, and he hates us. Number one, because we're made in God's image, and he hates all human beings because they're made in God's image. But because we're willing to stand up and spit in his eye and say, kiss my you know what. I'm not afraid of you. And you can kick and scream and levitate and turn, spin heads around all you want. Those are all tactics meant to scare people. I mentioned earlier, I've been involved in exorcisms. I'm not an exorcist. I didn't perform the exorcism, but I was there helping Bishop McKenna when he would do them. And I remember he used to meet with us in the back of the church. And there was 3 or 4 guys my size. And we were just there to protect the person from hurting themselves and protect Bishop McKenna from being hurt. And Bishop McKenna, he would look at us, he goes, don't look at it. He wouldn't say him or her. He would say it. Don't look at it when the demon manifests, because once he starts the prayer of the ritual Romanum, they will always manifest in some way, shape, or form. Okay? It wasn't always a violent thrashing. Sometimes the eyes would turn black or they turned into what would look like serpent's eyes. And those are meant to scare you. So he would say, look away, don't look at it, don't acknowledge it. If it asks you a question or if it says anything to you, don't answer it. Just continue to pray. You could pray aloud, you could pray silently, just pray. I would pray prayers of deliverance as a layman because deliverance prayers is a layman's form of exorcism, which are very powerful prayers. Okay, but the difference between deliverance prayers and exorcism is deliverance prayers can be prayed by any of us. Okay, God gave us all the ability to cast out demons in his name. It's not like I, Joe Frankie, cast you out. You're going to laugh at me. It's like I cast you out in the name of Jesus Christ and the blood of Christ. Go to the foot of the cross and accept your fate. And they must do it. They must answer to their creator. Whereas, so those are deliverance prayers, or you're praying for the afflicted person. Exorcism prayers are directed at the demon, and those are reserved only for the exorcist. Like Bishop McKenna, or Father Gary Thomas, or Father Carlos Martin. There's a lot of exorcists around the country that are pretty well known because they do podcasts and things like that. But they'll tell you the same things. Someone like me or you or anybody else should never direct anything towards the demon itself because they could shred you. No one's prepared for that. Trust me.
Annette was saying it was Chittenden.
I remember Annette. Yes, Chittenden, Vermont. And no, I wasn't involved in that case, but I think Jason McLeod was one of the investigators the Warrens had. I think he wrote a book on it actually. But if you reach out to Jason McLeod, McLoed, I think he wrote a book on that case that he worked on. I do remember the case vaguely, but I wasn't involved in that one. Sorry.
So now going ahead to today, I don't know if you're at liberty to talk about what we had talked before the show started about what you've been working on for quite some time now.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. We'll talk about something else.
No, that's fine. The Enfield, Connecticut haunting. Uh, Years ago, the Discovery Channel did a show on it. I wasn't involved in it, but they called it the Demon House, the Enfield Demon House, because it's catchy. I never liked that name. I've never called it that name. I have a big segment of my lecture where I talk about the Enfield haunting. And sometimes people get that confused between the Enfield poltergeist, which happened in England back in the late 70s. This is the Enfield, Connecticut haunting. I've been involved with the family since 2007. They have twin girls. I remember when I was first contacted. Anytime someone contacts me and says there's children involved, I get involved right away. Children are very near and dear to my heart. And, the thing is, the children were targeted, and the epicenter of the activity seemed to be the nursery. So this poor family had these twin daughters. They're a little over a year old, and all kinds of things would happen to them. Matter of fact, one of the girls, I believe, could see this thing because she'd have her binky in her mouth and she'd always point to it, and things would levitate in the room. The father came in the room one day. The girls were going crazy. He walks in the room. He looks over in the corner, and the changing table was levitating about 6 inches off the floor. And he said he walked in and it came slamming down. Now here's a guy. Here's a big, strong guy, an ex-Marine, not afraid of anything, right? He was terrified. They grabbed their children and he ran downstairs and they called me and I came up there and I go up there and there's all everything went quiet. And years later I had a psychic tell me that whenever you come up here, Joe, it hides from you. All right? Not because it's afraid of me hurting it, but it's afraid of me finding out its identity. See, when you're working with demonic cases, they will manifest if provoked. What Ed used to call religious provocation, which is extremely dangerous. Unless you know what you're doing, you should not be doing that. But they want to hide in the shadows. They don't want to be drawn out into the light. They want to hide in the shadows and just cause mayhem. All right? But they would attack the children. They would attack the family. This is back in 07, 08. And one day we happened to be there. My buddy and I happened to be there. We were downstairs. One of our team members went upstairs taking pictures. And she was picked up and thrown across the room. And she was a big woman. She was about 5'6", 5'7", about 200 pounds. She got thrown across the room. The camera went flying about 20 feet this way. And we had the video camera trained on the crib facing into the room. And we come up and we hear growling, this deep guttural growling. It was coming from the whole house. It wasn't coming from a room. It was coming from everywhere. And we started talking about the growling, and the mother goes in to grab the child, and all of a sudden this entity comes out of the crib and exits stage right. This thing rises up out of the crib. I believe it was inside the child, because where else could it have been? In the mattress? I mean, I believe that this entity was inside this poor girl, who's now, the girl's in about 2 weeks, they're going to be 18 years old. But they still live in the house. I know a lot of people say, well, what do they still live there for? Look, whatever they dealt with, not necessarily was going to stay in the house. It could have followed them. They tried to move many times. Every time they try to move, something tragic would happen that would, cause that to fall through. They've tried to sell the house. No one wants to buy it. So what I do is, what we did was we had Bishop McKenna came up in about, I think it was 2011, 2012, somewhere around that time frame, because he passed away in 2015. And Bishop McKenna did an exorcism in the home. And he came up a couple of times, actually. And we believe whatever that entity was at the time is gone. There's still activity in the home to this day, but it's very, I want to say, light. It's not demonic in nature, in my opinion. They'll see shadow people, but they don't do anything. They don't say anything. They don't even move. They'll just appear and they'll just disappear. We believe that there's some elemental energy there, nature spirits, things like that. It's on ancient, Indian burial ground, but there was sacred Indian territory back then. It used to be known as Thompsonville, Connecticut. So there's such a history to this home. The home was built 253 years ago, 1771. But there's still activity there, and there's always going to be activity there. And it's not just the house itself that just seems to be like the hub. The entire area surrounding uh, the town and the air, the Connecticut River is a stone's throw from the house. So you've got a huge water source there. Um, but it's fascinating. I go up there and I feel peace. I feel very at home, a very loving environment. But back in the day, I would leave. I'd get home, and I'm about 40 minutes away. I no sooner walk in my front door, and I get a phone call from the homeowner saying, "Joe, something happened. This happened." There was one night with a Tiffany lamp. They had a big Tiffany lamp that weighs about 40 pounds. It's huge, and it levitated. It turned upside down, and then the spike just shot down into the floor. Okay, and we've got video, not video, but photographic evidence of this. And they would see black shadows. They would smell foul odors. We were up there. We early on in the investigation, we burned sage. We went up there. I remember it was a Friday night. We burned some sage, and sage. If you're dealing with demonic entities, you burn sage. It's just going to piss it off. All right. If you play Gregorian chants, it's just going to piss it off. I would do it on purpose just to piss it off, but that's because we're trying to draw it out. So the next day, Saturday, the family got up and they went out to breakfast. The mother made their bed, the master bedroom. They came home, and right in the middle of the bed, on top of the mattress, was this pile of sage ash, like a perfect, pile of ash. In other words, it was like a sign to us saying, screw you, I'm not going anywhere. It just appeared out of nowhere on the bed. All kinds of things would happen. You'd hear footsteps, like I said, growling, knockings on the walls. Cabinets would open and fly open. Doors would open and close. Your typical haunted house stuff, if you will. But it would be like what we call an infestation, as opposed to a vexation, which is an annoyance, but it happens every once in a while, just to annoy you. Infestation is when this stuff happens like on a daily basis. Things have quieted down quite a bit over the years. So what I do now, the family, because this is a duplex, the family lives on one side of the house. The renter side, they can't keep a renter in there. They've tried to rent the house, for years, and people would just leave in the middle of the night and say, because they've been scared out of there. So what I do to help the family pay their bills is I'll go up there and do a lecture in the house, and they'll sell tickets, and we'll allow a dozen people to sit in the living room, and I'll give a talk, and we'll talk about the history of the house, and I'll show them my video and photographic evidence. And I say, well, you're sitting in the home where this all happened, many years ago. The home is safe. I wouldn't let anybody come in if it wasn't safe. But,
Right.
People that, just want the thrill of being in a real haunted house, a documented haunted house. So that helps the family survive because they still got to pay the light bills. But they're
Right.
losing anywhere from $1,800 to $2,000 a month on rental income because nobody will stay there. I think the longest tenant stayed there was 6 or 8 months. And it always ends the same way. They always end up leaving. They get scared out of there.
Here's a
A fascinating
real.
case.
This will be the last question that we're going to handle. What are your thoughts on groups that have parents and adult children who investigate cases that are more than a kind spirit? Do you think that evil spirits or demonic entities could use that family unit against each other during their investigation?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you got a group of people, whether they're family or not, if they're not properly trained and they don't really know what they're doing, and I'm not trying to come down on anyone because I was once there myself. I didn't know butt from my elbow when I was a teenager. But, you know, you can't just go on a case and start poking the bear, okay? Because if there is something negative there and it attaches to you and to your family members, I don't advocate people taking their children on cases, especially if they're underage, because they're very susceptible. They're very innocent and they could be targeted. And of course, it'll turn them against one another. This case I mentioned in Danbury, Connecticut, the family's like, Joe, when we're outside the house, we seem to get along fine. But anytime we're in the house, we fight constantly. We bicker. And everyone's at each other's throats. I said, you got to stop that. And they said, well, how do we stop? I said, well, how are you with your faith? And they said, we've lost our faith. And I said, well, that's what it wants. So if there is something evil there, I don't want to say demonic because not everything is demonic, you know, but if there is some negative energy there, it's feeding off that negativity. You know, negativity breeds negativity, and you're just making it stronger, and it's just sitting there laughing its ass off at you. You know, I would not advocate people go out and do these investigations without proper training, and that may be hard to get these days. I do what I can to teach people here locally. I have been approached by quite a few people to do classes. You know, I can teach people what I know, but I don't know everything. You know, there's a lot of gifted people out there that probably know more than I do. You know, I would just say be very careful if you're speaking for yourself or someone you know. You know, I can't caution you enough. I've lived this for 40 years. It's not something I'm happy about, but I was called to do this work. I firmly believe that. And my reward is to be able to look in the faces of someone or a family and see the relief in their eyes and say, Joe, I haven't been able to sleep this well, this good in years or in months. Well, I don't know what you did. I said, well, I didn't do it. You did it. This is your home. This is your family. Okay. This is your business, wherever the case may be. I said, I'll help you. I'll guide you. I'll support you. I got your six. I said, but like I said, I'm not going to come in with a proton pack on my back. I said, I'm going to help you, you know, and guide you through it. But you ultimately have to have skin in the game. This is your family. This is your life. This is your house. You need to take it back, you know.
Would you actually go ahead and change the amount of people that you would bring in to a particular location, depending on what was you thought was there?
Yeah, you got to be careful with bringing too many people to a location. The more people you bring, the more susceptible you are because you got to make sure you pick a team and everybody on that team needs to be in that state of absolution, like I said.
Right.
Okay. You got one week, if you bring in 8 people and one of those people or 2 of those people are not ready, they're going to be targeted or they could be targeted. All right. Now I'm responsible for the people I bring. So I'm very selective. All right. I say you go in there with 1 or 2 people, never go in alone. Now, I say that hypocritically because there's been many cases I've gone in alone. I didn't have a choice. I didn't have anybody else to go with me, or it might have been an emergency where I had to get there. So, you know, I'm totally honest to a fault. I'll tell people right now, I have gone in on cases on my own years past, but don't ever go alone. Bring someone that you trust and just make sure that you're one. You know, you're on par with one another, and you use the buddy system. Don't wander off on your own. You know, but I certainly wouldn't go in with a group of people. And with a lot of these groups, that's where you run into infighting. It's like, well, how come this one got to go in the last 2 cases and I didn't get to go? And believe me, I've lived that myself with my own team, where people are like, well, Joe, how come I never get to go on a case? I'm like, well, because you're not ready. I need you to do research behind the scenes. I don't need you up in an attic somewhere provoking something because you're not ready for that. But, you know, people's egos get in the way. You know, and I hate to say that, but it's all about ego. And that's all it is out there in the YouTube world is look at me, look at me, look at me. I'm like, you got to leave your ego at the door. If someone's bringing into you into their home or their place of business, and they're looking at you as the professional. They're looking to you for help. Okay, you better know what you're doing. Can't tell you how many times I've been contacted and said, Joe, we had ABC Paranormal in here last week, and something happened and spooked them, and they ran. They collected all their equipment and they ran out of the house. And then they, pardon the phrase, they ghosted us. They won't call us back, because they got scared. I said, well, it's probably because they didn't know what they were doing and they got in over their heads. But now they made the situation worse because you're playing with people's lives and their emotions. And they're like, what happened to these people? I have to live in this house. This guy just told me I have the portal to hell up in the back bedroom. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, you're trying to put the stuff back in the horse, right?
Yes.
And I'll say, you don't have a demon here. I said, let me see what's going on here, but I can assure you it's not demonic. All right. So I have to start from scratch, but it's very hard for me personally because where I live, I don't have a lot of team members in Connecticut. So I have to be very selective of who I bring. I have people I can bring, but they're not experienced. I'll bring them for support. I'll bring them maybe to take notes or photographs, but they're not allowed to ask questions. They can ask me questions, but not of the clients. It depends on the situation, Greg. There's many different scenarios, and it's not easy.
You have to conduct everything professionally, and that's what you're talking about now. So I mean, you can't do, and plus the fact that the spirits will recognize all that too.
Yeah, in many of these cases, they really don't have a paranormal problem. I come from a background. I worked 30 years for a company where I was in charge of safety and security, and I retired a few years ago, which has afforded me to spend more time with the foundation. But I do what I call root cause analysis, and I'll say, okay, folks, I'll get the family together. I'll meet with the family, whether it's Zoom call or if it's close, I'll go to the house. And it's okay. I know what you're telling me is happening, and I believe you. However, now we have to find out why it's happening. Is it self-manifesting? And that's a very real thing. The mind is a very powerful thing. A lot of times you'll have nothing going on, and I'm not saying that people are making up the stories or they're lying to me. In their mind, it's very real, but they're self-manifesting this activity, So it's like, no, you don't have a demon here, because I'll have a husband and wife looking at each other, we're sitting at their kitchen table, and the husband will say, I don't know, she's crazy. I don't experience anything. She says she sees this, that, and the other thing, or vice versa. She'll say, well, he tells me he sees this and that. Well, people could also be targeted. You and I could be sitting next to each other, and I might see something and you didn't see it. That's because it was meant for me.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that someone's lying or just making this up. Because I can tell. After all the years I've been doing this, I can look in their eyes and tell if someone's trying to BS me or not. But you try to find comfort for them and bring them some peace. And a lot of times I'll walk through the home, we'll do a blessing, we'll go through it over every door and window and take holy water and holy oil. I'll give them a holy relic or a medal, St. Michael. A lot of times that's just to appease them. It's psychosomatic. I'll talk to them a couple of weeks later and say, Joe, I don't know what you did, but it's gone now. I'm like, that's great. Awesome. Keep me posted. Meanwhile, I know deep down that there really wasn't anything there. I just wanted to make them feel better. So just by me going out there or one of my team going out there and sitting there, giving a shoulder to lean on, an ear to listen to, and tell them and look in them in the eye and say, look, you're not crazy. Okay, let's figure out what you're experiencing here and let's see if we can do something. You might have a human spirit that needs help crossing over. We call that spirit rescue. You might have a spirit that wanders the earth that may be confused or too scared to pass over. And we'll call upon one of their loved ones to pull them over, and then the problem's solved. Sometimes it is that easy. It's, I just had a case here locally where one of my neighbors, I never met the woman, but my daughter saw on Facebook where this woman was very reluctant to put her story on Facebook, but she had stuff going on in her house that she couldn't explain, and it was scaring her and her husband, and they had a 1-year-old child. And so she puts it out on Facebook for fear of ridicule. But within an hour, my daughter told me she had like 48 comments that said, "Oh, you need to call a priest," or "You need an exorcism," or "Oh, you need to call my brother's sister's boyfriend's cousin, who's part of the ABC Paranormal." And my daughter chimed in and she goes, "No, you need to call my father." All right. So here my daughter's 25 years old. She knows what she's talking about because she's lived with me, you know. So she's like, so my daughter calls me. I said, "Emily," I said, give the woman my phone number and tell her to call me. Within 10 minutes, the woman called me. I said, "What's going on?" You know? So I just asked her a few questions. I talked to her over a couple of nights. I gathered some information. And at the end of the day, it seemed like, her grandmother had passed away about 6 months before her child was born. So never got to see the child, when she was alive. So what she described to me sounded like a classic case of a loved one coming and visiting the child, because it's the child that would react to this, what he was
Right.
seeing someone. So all I told her to do is I said, "Okay." I said, "Just walk around the house like you're talking to me and say Gram or Grandma," or I guess her grandmother was of Polish descent. I'm not sure what the word was for grandmother. I said, "Just walk around the house and address her, acknowledge her, and say thank you for coming and visiting. But please, you're scaring, the little child, and you're welcome to visit us. But please, don't make the lights flicker on and off and this and that." Well, within a week or two, I called her. I said, "How's things going?" She goes, "It's amazing." She goes, "Everything stopped. All the activity stopped." Okay. And she had asked me at one point, she goes, my grandmother didn't speak much English. She was Polish. Should I speak to her in Polish or in English? I said, "It doesn't matter, dear." I said, "She'll understand you." Okay. I never even visited the house, Greg. This was all done over the phone. Now
Oh,
you got all these groups out there today, like they're ready to load up the mystery machine, grab Scooby Doo, and run out to the house. You
yeah.
don't need to do that. An investigation of the property is probably the last thing you need to do. Okay, you deal with the family, find out what they're claiming's going on, and try to find a rational solution or explanation, and then a solution for what's going on. You don't need to run out there and set up all your equipment and all that stuff. That's not necessary in many cases. So I keep in touch with her. The woman only lives about a half a mile from me. I never went to the house. I never set foot in the house. I instructed her what to do. She did what I asked of her, and she said all the activity has stopped. The lights aren't flickering anymore. Her son isn't seeing this woman anymore, which I believe that it was her grandmother just coming to visit. Which is a beautiful thing. That shouldn't be scary. You know. Sorry to get so long-winded. I know we've probably gone
I'm
over.
glad. I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm glad you were here tonight because, you bring a lot of light to the people, a lot of the people that investigate, and give them a real good idea of exactly if they should stay on their path or change it a little bit on their approach for an investigation. And
Yeah, and one thing
that's
I want to say, forgive me, Greg. I want to just say to your listeners, I apologize if anything I said here tonight offended anybody. I don't mean to offend anyone. Like I said, I don't know everything, but if I said something that someone might have taken offense at, I apologize. That isn't my intention, because I was once where you are now. There was a
right.
time in my life where I didn't know anything, and I got on the right path, like you said. I had Ed and Lorraine Warren as my mentors. God rest their souls. But I certainly never want to offend anybody and say, "Well, Joe thinks he knows everything." No, I don't. But I will help anybody. If there's anybody that ever wants to reach out to me, please feel free to do so. I will get back to you. It might take me a few days, but I will get back to you.
So this coming season, now that we're at the end of the year, are you going to be at any particular events over the year?
Yeah, I got some scheduled. A lot of them locally here in Connecticut, but I will be at MegaCon. I've been
Okay.
invited back to MegaCon, which is a huge event in Orlando. It's not a Paracon or a HorrorCon. It's a Comic Con where they have like Hollywood celebrities and stuff. Well, last year I was invited, and Bill Slevin put this together. We were invited there, and we were like the only paranormal team there. And people were the response was overwhelming. People came up like, "Oh my God, Joe, I didn't know you were going to be here." I'm like, "I didn't know you knew who I was." But I have my picture there with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and like people know the Warren name. And so I will be at MegaCon. It's the first week of February. It's a 4-day event. I think it's the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th of February. So I'll be down there with Bill and my wife. We'll have a booth there. I will be giving some panels talking about my history and a lot of the stuff I talked to tonight about Ouija boards and divination.
Well, that's really awesome. I know
I'll be there,
that we were talking
this
about
year's gonna
time
fill up.
wise,
Yep.
and if I get an opportunity to have you back on later on in the year, I would love to have you. That would be great.
I'd be honored.
If you get a hold of Chris, tell him I said hi, please.
Oh, I will. I'll be talking to him tomorrow or the next day, I'm sure.
Okay.
I was supposed to call him yesterday, but I had to go in for this medical procedure on my leg today, so I was preoccupied.
So if you'd like to hang for 5, I'm going to go ahead and shut this thing down. Say goodbye to everybody. Okay, everybody. It's been an awesome night.
You.
And we will see you guys all next week on Wednesday. And until then, we're just going to go ahead and say goodnight and thank Joe Frankie again for being an awesome guest. So everybody, see you later on. Good night. Ha 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 ha.